And the thing about it is this: the limestone on the pyramid, as you can see, it was covered with limestone. All of the mirrors were covered with limestone, the big ones. They were later taken off. The limestone again on the top, it looks like snow, but they were all covered in limestone, the three great ones. And they were later taken off and used to make, I believe, present-day Cairo. You see the shiny white gleam. It came from the mirrors. And again, getting back to Moses, Moses was an Alkebalanian. He was also a Kemetic. Now, getting back to the Kemetic part, let's see what the first pharaoh, Narmer, or Aha, as the ancient Kemetics say. Look at him. Well, that says a lot. The image of Narmer, King Narmer, as you can see again, the full lips, the full nose, African. And this, he was the first true king of Kemet, where he unified Upper and Lower Kemet, where that was the first dynasty. And again, we're talking about something that happened about 4,000 or so years ago. This is a statue of Narmer, as you can see. So how does it make you feel when you see that your face is in the stones, your face, your handiwork is on the mirrors and Heramaket and pictures, and the Greeks speak highly, the ancient Greeks speak highly of you. See, this is positive. This is why we have this positive ministry for African people, especially for African Christians. You may be asking yourself a question though. Oh, one more last picture just as a reminder of what it was all about. Again, someone that was an 18th dynasty king. And again, the name Pharaoh is not correct. Pharaoh means big house. It's more king than anything else. And here we are again, King Tutankhamun, or Tutankhamun, however you want to pronounce it, right? And you see his full gold mask, wealthy, engineered. You have metallurgy involved. You have people that knew art or they knew chemicals. Remember, this mask is over 2,000, 3,000 years old. Really, when you look at it, this is what we have. As far as the face is concerned, you have the full lips again, the full African lips, and the nose, the African nose. This is not, again, this is, he's from a line of kings. And again, they are African people. Now your history is there. So the first part of our solution shows God never placed us under a curse. He placed us in a position to be a great, great, great people. Great people. Now we'll keep that on the picture of King Tutankhamun on while we're talking here. There's something that we need to know. We know the past. And the past is powerful. But we have to understand something about how do we totally defeat racism. God has a plan. The first part of that plan to defeat it has to do with our true heritage, our true history, not only history in terms of the secular. Racism, to defeat it, we found out that we had to know the true history that we really have. And the images are very important, because now you're seeing yourself. You're seeing what you look like in history. No longer is your history being denied or blocked off from you seeing who you really are. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Pardon me. Now, the next thing we're going to look at in terms of who we are is covenant. Covenant is very, very important because it's through covenant that God operates so that we, as a group of people, can be restored to power. And that covenant that God has is with black Christians and black churches. This explains why, for instance, during slavery, when black Christians and black churches were involved, God acted. It was over. It had nothing to do with politics. It had much to do with operating in covenant. The same with Jim Crow segregation. When the black churches and the black Christians got together and operated in God's covenant, that's when everything started moving. Now, here are some of the characteristics of a black church that's in covenant with God. And I'm going to read from the Usgodpower for Black People book. I want to read a couple of things first. And starting out with the Usgodpower for Black People book, which, thank you. And again, the program that this book is a part of, it gives you the weapons to defeat racism, the tools to live successfully, and the plan to unify and restore power and influence. This is very, very important. The Usgodpower for Black People program. And I'm going to read from a number of pages for it. I'm putting it down now. And remember, the program not only includes the book, it also includes the 3 CDs. It's a book and 3 CD set. You need that. Faith comes by hearing. Okay? Now, I'm going to put this down, the book down. I'm going to read from a part of it because we need to know where the direction we're supposed to be going. If we know the direction we're going into as a church, as black Christians, God can operate and do what he does best. He can be God. Okay, I'm reading on page 60 of the Usgodpower for Black People book, which is part again of the program. It says this. Understand. Okay, let's read this very carefully. Again, many of our great leaders in the civil rights movement came from the church. Leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose books describe his use of nonviolent methods, and Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. in Congress. And never overlook God's appointment, not man's, of Attorney Thurgood Marshall to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Al-Kabalinian Church, or the Black Church if you want to call it that, was a big factor in the civil rights movement, and legal segregation, another foe of black people, was later defeated. While this victory for black people as U.S. citizens was great, since we can now influence government policy through the democratic process, it was a costly setback for the black church. The black church had exchanged its strength in God for the weakness of man, because it was depending on government for social and economic change. Understand, the main goals of the black church have never been fully realized. These goals are: 1, glorification of God through our words and deeds as independent people in Christ, and 2, the defeat of institutionalized racism. Our black people are not in full control of our destiny. We have allowed governments to become our so-called gods in terms of decision making, which in turn, as we have seen in the origin of institutionalized racism, which is in the book, largely benefits non-black groups while satanically destroying us through underdevelopment. So, the subjugation or the defeat of institutionalized racism by the spirit-empowered black church and the glorification of God through our faith put in action as black people in total command and in charge of our destiny is the challenge for the black church of today, especially the church in the United States of America, which is the herald of the era of the more mature church. Thank God for the black church of today. Now, let's look at some of the characteristics of a covenanted black church and black Christians so that our God can operate effectively to defeat this foe. Going to page 58 of the Usgodpower for Black People book, we find that the characteristics of the black church, or as I call it, the Alkebalanian church, one of them is it was the major source of black leadership. And I'll read this. When great leaders such as Bishop Richard Allen and Bishop James Varick rejected the non-black church's segregationist and racist policies of treating black people as subhumans, they boldly obeyed God by starting the African Methodist Episcopal and the African Methodist Episcopal Zion churches. That is the AME and AME Zion churches. Bishop Allen's and Bishop Varick's bold determination to improve the spiritual, psychological, and physical well-being of black people are just two examples of the black churches providing future leaders and future leadership for black people. There were other great leaders that came from the church, such as Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass, and of course Dr. Martin Luther King, of course. All of them risked their lives for fighting for the freedom of black people. Now, we're looking at this, and I have to ask you a question, black churches and black Christians. Where are we now in developing that kind of leadership? Let's face it, it's very nice to have ministers being groomed in a black church. And yes, it's also very wonderful to have entertainers being groomed in black churches. But when it comes down to it, that is just a fraction of what God intended for our churches to do. And one of the major policies that our churches must have is to, in covenant, get and develop new leadership for black people. Now, there's something else, another great quality of the black church that was covenanted. And I'm talking especially during the times of the Civil War with slavery. That church was an awesome, a powerful church. A communications network. The black church provided confidential information to anti-slavery groups, such as the abolitionists, who were able to move about undetected and well coordinated because the network of black churches in the North and South. Now that's powerful. And of course, cooperation. The church recognized the foe as slavery. The church recognized the foe as segregation. Not different denominations which make up the churches. They may have had their differences, and they still do, but they work together to get the job done. Black churches